Hello, a pleasant afternoon, everyone. Welcome to your favorite show, Friday Drinks. A lovely afternoon here in Harare. The weather is actually changing, it's getting warmer, and it's good for some of us who are not used to the cold weather. So it's a different show. We Something has just happened. I think I'll explain later. But we had to take care of business after what we witnessed last week, where Rufaro and Tinashe were urging each other on some policy direction that I don't think everyone pretty much agreed with it. So it's going to be a lovely show. And today I've got a special guest. He's not new to the show. He's a friend of the show, Dr. Gresham Mkodzong. Welcome to the show, Doc.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure to be here.
Thank you. It's always good to have you on Friday Drinks. I know we have had some shows with you before. So this is just, anyway, before we get down to the business of the day, I think the business of the day is actually the drinking part, isn't it? That's why you call it Friday Drinks.
Okay.
What are you drinking, Doc?
Yes, I'm drinking a Glenfiddich 18. Pretty smooth and good. I think obviously for a socialist, that's that to help to smoothen things and also to help me articulate some of our counter arguments to the capitalist manifesto that was argued for last week.
Okay.
So
interesting. And on my corner, I am going with some roasted coffee beans. So it's High Country. It's a local brand. And I believe that it also helped me navigate through the conversations of the day. And in the middle there, we were something special. I was, before the show started, I was told to just stick to calling it a cheese board. But I did my research. I think it's called a charcuterie board, whatever it is. But this is fantastic. Doc, don't you think that we are being set up?
Yeah, it looks like
because we actually being projected as communists. On your side there, you've got a Glen 18, and on the center there's this cheese board. And what kind of narrative are these guys trying to
It's very contradictory because people know communism, starving, and so suddenly there is a high quality whiskey and a sumptuous cheese board on a Friday. Then, but it shows that it's not bad at all to be a socialist. It doesn't mean you don't have to drink good whiskey, you don't have to eat good food. You could be, a very good socialist. And
it's interesting that you are highlighting that, but I want you to answer directly to this accusation that so this show is going to be run by a communist. Are you a communist, Doc? And generally, what is your political ideology in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think I subscribe to some of the ethos of communism and socialism, whatever you want to call it. Although obviously that name, the word communism, has been pretty bastardized in the sense that, it evokes memories of totalitarianism and unfree markets and all. But, I'm very sympathetic to that ideology. And I tend to, so politically speaking, I think I will be what is called, of course, I think that will be more conservative to be called a social democrat because I'm on the left of that. Okay. So I think I would like something that is socially egalitarian, if there's something like that. But in general, I don't mind if someone calls me a communist or socialist. I'm not bothered at all. Yeah.
And speaking for myself, I'm certainly not a communist. I think I would want to style myself as a social democrat because I believe in democracy, in social justice and capitalism. In my view, capitalism that actually ignores the social aspect is bound to fail because whatever business that you do, you actually do it in a setting where there are people. They could be your employees, your staff, your labor. It could be even your customers. Yeah. Because capitalists actually forget one thing, that they are not actually selling to fellow capitalists. They are selling to everyone. And this could be some of the people that they think in their modeling are not important, but those are your customers. and it's something that would really want to dive deep into. And from last week's show, one issue that actually came out quite clearly was the role of government in business and economic activity. Doc, what do you think the role of government should be in society?
I think, yes, the government has multiple roles, and some of these roles are complementary and some of them are contradictory. Generally speaking, from a socialist point of view, governments are designed to facilitate capitalist transactions. This is why the world over, if there is a crisis of capitalism, the government is empowered, if not is encouraged to intervene in markets, although our colleagues, the capitalist proponents, will never want to agree. We see a lot of capitalist social welfareism towards companies that are obviously getting broke. We see a lot of bailouts after the 2008 financial crisis. We saw the governments, even the most extreme capitalist ones in the US, in the UK, a lot of banks being bailed out by the state. But then the same people who got bailed out will be very against the idea of subsidies to healthcare, subsidies to education. I believe that the government has to moderate capitalism. It has to also look out for those who are left vulnerable and marginalized by capitalism. So I think us with the sort of social inclinations we are not necessarily against the business or the government supporting business. All we are against is extreme capitalism, where we've got a thriving capitalist economy, which is also underpinned by social inequality, poverty, and marginalization. We want to see a balance. We want to be able to see the government making the same effort it does when there's a capitalist crisis. We also want the government to make the same kind of effort and investments in social services vis-a-vis. So there must be a balance. We're just looking for an equilibrium. We are very reasonable people. We just don't want extremes. You don't want an extremely rich nation where at the same time there's extreme poverty. We want a balance. An extremely rich nation must also be able to support its vulnerable citizens. We see the models in Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, and so forth, where there is capitalism, but there tend to be some more investments in social services. Those are the kind of models we yearn for.
It's very interesting that you are raising that point, because it actually speaks directly to what the free market capitalists are saying is not good. So on one hand, they are not happy when they see government subsidizing social services, but they actually tend to be the biggest recipients of subsidies if you consider the amount of money that actually are involved when a bailout has to be a bailout program has to be instituted. Why do you think there's that disconnect between what they see as not good when government is actually helping the vulnerable and when government steps in to help the rich?
Oh yeah, the logic is flawed. That's why, again, some of us are against this kind of free market, what I would call free market fundamentalism. I think if the government can bail out big businesses, why is it impossible for them to bail out poor people? I think, as I said earlier, we should be able to support our struggling citizens. And those decisions, you see, you know what? Business is always overly influence government. Because obviously elites in government and people in politics and in business tend to wine and dine together. If you're in the American model, you see those so-called lobbyists that have offices across in Washington who are hobnobbing with politicians. In any country, you always find people with the capacity. People from business have the upper hand in lobbying government, so that if anything goes wrong, creating a conducive environment for enterprise. And we're not necessarily against that. All we are against is that after supporting private enterprise, the government must also support its citizens. We just need a balance, like I said. the government must be enthusiastic when it comes to supporting its own citizens that are struggling, as it does when there's a capitalistic crisis. As we witness in the couple of capitalistic crises we have experienced in history, all those have ended with bailouts of capitalism. So why should the government not bail out its struggling citizens? That's our argument. Our argument is the government must be able to tax the rich and subsidize the poor, because the rich are also beneficiaries of government subsidies. So we need a balance.
It's interesting. So that is clear in terms of what needs to be done when there's a crisis, both on the capitalist side where they are getting bailouts, and also on the part of the poor. But then let's then look at the role of government in business. Should government be involved in any business venture? If so, in what way? And maybe as we are discussing that, maybe you would also want to look at, because part of the reasons why you hear a lot of noises around, no, government must not be involved, like when you look at it from the Zim point of view, is because of the legacy of failure that our local parastatals have actually been experiencing over the years. So first, should governments be involved in any kind of business venture, and in what way, and how do you place it vis-a-vis the general failure by our local parastatals in running businesses and maybe discharging their mandates?
Yeah, to just be clear, what is a government? Socialist thinking and writing says that the government is an executive committee of capitalists. It is there to facilitate capitalist transactions. So the government, by its nature, is a de facto capitalist committee, right? It's biased towards capitalism. Although there is a wide variety of governance across the world. And when it comes to state-owned enterprises, there are countries where those have worked. You look in China, you look in Sweden, you look in the Middle East, Saudi Aramco, sovereign wealth funds run by the government for profit. Those have worked. Our example is an extreme example. We are a country that is trying to be a capitalist country, so that we are in a transitional moment. A lot of these countries have developed sophisticated ways to make sure that state-owned enterprises are successful. We have a problem of chronic corruption and some form of petty thieves that are running some of these entities. So we are not a very good example when you are proposing or supporting the idea of government being involved in business, because we have bad managers, not only in Zimbabwe, but across the different jurisdictions in Africa, where even in South Africa, you see most state-owned enterprises are taking a lot of taxpayers' money and they are not profitable and all. So we are saying there are places where they work.
Like where? Maybe one would ask. Which one?
We have given you examples in China. China. A lot of state-owned companies, they work. In Norway, for example, look at that sovereign wealth fund that was created out of the oil bonanza. It's working. It's invested in a lot of business and it's making a hell lot of money. They have excess money. There's a lot of that happening and good examples in the Middle East. Most of the investments happening there are from sovereign wealth funds that are owned by the government. Have you ever heard those sovereign wealth funds having problems of corruption or misinvesting? No, they are investing in what they are mandated to do. Here we have problems. In most African jurisdictions, we have problems where you've got these political appointed people running these companies and running them down. So it doesn't mean it doesn't work. You just need a regime put there and people facing the consequences of running them down. So there is a case for state-owned enterprises where possible. Even in Zimbabwe, I think if you reform them or partly privatize them like they did before, but you don't want to partly privatize them while not exchanging the sort of people running them. I think you need to have the right people professionally running them. They could be profitable. Our problem is that we've got political appointees. Some of these people don't have the expertise to run these entities, so they run them down. So it does not necessarily mean the model itself is a problem. How the model is implemented is the problem, because if it has worked somewhere else, why can't it work here? They should be able to work, I think.
So when we are looking, so if it's an issue of the actors, maybe one would ask and make a case that if we have got two entities, one run as a parastatal and one run as a private venture, at any given time, the private venture is likely to do much better than parastatal.
Not true. Sorry for interjection. How many banks have gone under in Zimbabwe? None of government owned the banks. You know.
It's interesting.
How many? Were those run by government? No. How many companies have gone under in Zimbabwe that are not run by government?
So it was because of policies that were being driven by the...
No, but that's an excuse. I mean, if you're a capitalist, you must survive. You know, it's like a captain of a ship who says it's been too windy. I mean, your job is to survive in a windy environment.
Yeah,
you can't give excuses. You have companies that have survived world wars. You have companies that survived the 2008 financial crisis. Some went under, some didn't. So we are saying, you can't then say, my company went under because of bad government policy. Even in the West jurisdictions where there's no rule of law, where there's a civil war happening, there are companies that survive in a civil war. Go, for example, in the DRC, there are companies mining cobalt there, mining all other minerals in Congo.
Okay.
So
these guys are just looking for excuses.
No. They are not proper capitalists. They are pretenders. They just don't know what they are doing. No, your business model must survive difficult times.
Okay.
You must adjust to the environment. If your company cannot survive a politically unstable environment, in fact, there are people, venture capitalists, who invest in unstable jurisdictions.
Okay.
There are people with that model because in an unstable jurisdiction, there's very little laws.
Okay.
You see, and mining companies are very good at that. You will find there's a raging civil war, someone is mining a mineral. You see, and these people are surviving in an unstable, anything can happen, but they continue making money. What more of a country that is stable, bad policies here and there, but you should adjust to them. We have companies that have survived in Zimbabwe. Look at Econet, for example. Why is it not gone under? It has survived the inflationary environment and all and all. It's because they know something. They're adjusting to what is happening. Sometimes you wake up with the bond going up and down and so forth. You got to adjust to those dynamic changes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I tend to agree with you because that actually is a mark of a very good entrepreneur. You should be able to anticipate the risks that you are going to face in your environment and try to adapt to that and still be able to keep your ship afloat. So then the next issue that we want to talk about is on the discussion from last week. Was it then dwelt on the role of government in providing certain services. So it's education, it's public health, and it is also supporting various entrepreneurs, as it were. And I think I want to just share with our viewers something that I got from the World Bank, which we would want to make part of our discussion here, Doc. So the World Bank, in few years ago, commissioned what they call the Human Capital Index, and what they were saying was, we know that smart investments in human capital through education, health, and social services are the accelerators of economic growth. And this is the World Bank. They are at the apex of the free market capitalists. They actually believe that for you to kickstart the engine of growth, you definitely need some investments in human capital. So I want you to speak to that. First of all, is education a public good, and who should fund it?
It is a public good. Any nation, state making has everything to do with education. In fact, it's in the interest of the state to have educated. Even it's in the interest of capitalists to have educated people. You can't set up an enterprise, suddenly you don't have people. Look at Silicon Valley, for example. Most of the tech engineers there and all the people are foreign people poached from other countries, educated people. You need educated people.
Okay.
And whether they were educated through state subsidies or they were educated through private means doesn't really matter.
Okay.
But if a country is at a transitional stage where it has to subsidize its citizens, like we did in 1980, remember, most of our budding capitalists of all forms were beneficiaries of state education.
Okay.
Most of our budding capitalists in Zimbabwe, they were beneficiaries of state education. And the state, if you look at the state of our education in Zimbabwe now, most state schools are dilapidated. There's been very little investment in them. In fact, there's been a deliberate disinvestment from the state sector in favor of private education.
Okay.
And what has happened, we are not producing the kinds of people we used to produce when the state education model was in place. Why? We've got a lot of these private schools, but they're not producing the quality that we used to have. Most of our politicians, most of our industrialists came from the state education system, or partly subsidized by the state. So I would say it is a national security issue for the state to make sure that its citizens are educated. Whether that is, and where necessary, the state must pour money in education. In fact, under Zimbabwe's National Development Strategy, one of the things for us who are working in mining is that we have a problem of beneficiating minerals here. When you set up a beneficiation plant in Zimbabwe, one of your major problems you're going to have is to have the people with the technological know-how to run a smelter, to run a processing plant. So it is in the interest of the state, if it is trying to attract investment or to beneficiate minerals, to have educated people. I was in Madagascar, for example. We had a refiner that was set there to process cobalt and nickel in Tamitave. And what we're being told there, that Ambatofi, this $14 billion mine, it had to import over 80% of its technocratic people to run the refinery. With time, they were trying to educate some Malagasy people to be able to run it, which means, strategically speaking, from a purely political point of view, the state must have educated people, and it must invest in those people. And again, for a capitalist enterprise, to a capitalist economy to thrive, it needs educated people.
Okay.
So, in fact, some companies, we know some companies who offer bursaries to their potential employees or whatever, so to just make sure that they are producing the right people they need. So I think there's no question around the state being involved in somehow sponsoring education. It's good for the country, it's good for the economy, it's even good for capitalists.
But the argument is the government does not have the resources. It has to be the responsibility of each family to send their own kid to school, or maybe these schools must just be given to the community and then the community runs them. It is not the business of government to be running schools. And you are actually rightly saying that even the capitalists who benefit from the investment in education. But so I want to then just find out from you, what is the connection, the correlation between education and economic growth? Because I get a sense that maybe the investment in education is viewed as wasteful. It's government revenue that can be used for other things. And when it comes to the education, maybe someone has to pay for it. How would you respond to?
No, I mean, I would say it's a politically naive argument to say that the government has no interest in education. Strategically speaking, education is a national security issue. Any government must make sure that it has the right scientists. Look, for example, I'll give you this idea. Before the Americans developed the nuclear bomb, who did they get? They got all the best scientists they needed to develop the bomb under the Manhattan Project. They didn't get some uneducated person in the street, the best scientists.
Okay.
Some of them were even imported, who were working in America under the Manhattan Project. So, from a purely political point of view, it is a national security issue to educate scientists.
Okay.
To just make sure the country has the right people This is why in Zimbabwe there was a massive investment in education in 1980 after the country became independent. You know what? Because education is a national security issue. You need educated people to build key sectors of the economy. You need educated people. You could say, and you know, us who are proposing this model, we are not against private education. But we are saying even if there is a model that allows for private education, the state still must make sure that there's a fair amount of investment in education. It must not be seen as a wasteful venture, because when the state is levying rents of all forms, taxation, and so forth, some of the money raised from that taxation, when they are taxing capitalists and so forth, they must reinvest that money into education and other social services. It's good for the capitalists, it's good for the country, because there is a danger when you have so many people roaming around who are uneducated, trying to grab things. And even at domestic security, it's dangerous to have so many vagrants that are not educated. They are a threat to you. A capitalist, you are driving your car, they will break into your car. So it's in your interest to make sure that guy is not in the street. So it is not an argument to say the state must not invest in people. It must. For the security of everyone, we must all be safe. This is why, you know, when you educate people and people are relatively doing well, you've got less crime.
Okay.
But if you have a lot of marginalized people, they are committing crimes, and people normally commit crimes, correct me if I'm wrong, against rich people.
Yeah, sure.
You see? So the rich has an interest in this. That's why, you know, every company or any organ that are making money will also be philanthropic. You know, investing in local communities to address poverty and other injustices. So there is a case there for the state to play a key role in making sure that, one, from a security point of view, you are educating people. You need them. We have adversaries, not as many as other countries. If we went to war and suddenly we don't have anyone who is educated, how are we going to survive in that war?
Very interesting question. Doc, you can, Nibu, as I just share with our viewers a few stats that I have here. I'm still going back to that World Bank report where they were making a case that there's need for what they call sustained strategic investment in human capital. And they're saying that it's actually very critical for you to be able to achieve robust growth in your economy. And actually, they actually listed a number of things that you need to have in place. So obviously, you want to invest in smart fiscal infrastructure, then appropriate economic policy, and then also investing in your own people. And they're making a case that people are actually a driver of economic growth. And it's actually interesting, this one coming from the World Bank. The report went further to say equal countries tend to experience faster growth. There's actually a correlation between the level of equality in your society with the level of economic growth that you can achieve. And in particular, this report was actually focusing mostly on Africa. Then they were saying Africa is going to be, in few years' time, is going to be the residents of the biggest, in fact, a third of the population at some point is going to be resident in Africa. And if there's one significant thing that Africans have to take advantage of, it's actually the people, what they call the population dividend. So for you to be able to unlock that, it means your people have to be educated, and then your people also have to have a good health. They even gave went on to say, which I find quite interesting, that the impact of investment in human capital could be as much as could contribute as much as a third to half of economic growth. So if you are not investing in your own people, then that becomes a problem. And they actually gave an example of the Asian tigers, where we know them as the countries that achieved tremendous growth, and there was a general view that maybe that growth, in fact, they're making a case that the investment, it is actually the investment in education which actually propelled the growth that we saw in the Asian tigers. So, given all these good reasons for investment in human capital and all. I still trying to. Why do you think the free market capitalists still have struggles with state's involvement in educating its population?
I think it's a level for schizophrenia
Okay.
and misunderstanding of what the state should do. Schizophrenia in the sense that if in any country, I'll give you an example of a place I've been to. I happened to be in Silicon Valley and I attended this Google, it was called this University of the Future type thing.
Okay.
What is happening in that area is that's why you see there's even a special visa for people coming from other countries who are talent. Have you ever seen that the visa regimes of most Western countries are very discriminatory towards uneducated people? Have you noticed that?
Yes, that's very true. They give you
highly skilled visa.
Yes.
If you go to America, you've got a PhD.
Critical skills visa.
Critical skills visa. They don't like uneducated people. They just don't like you working in there and you are great too. They don't like uneducated people for a good reason. They are harvesting good people. They are harvesting educated people. So it is advantageous for any country to have educated people. And at any cost, you should invest. If you think your population, some of them cannot afford, and it's a huge number of the people, you should be able to subsidize those. In Scotland, for example, anyone who goes to Scottish, elementary school and so forth, their first degree in Scotland is for free. I think in Germany it's the same, and other Nordic countries. Education is for free. There is a reason these people do that. It's because it is beneficial not only to the government, but also to the capitalist economy there. Because you've got educated people. You need educated people because these are your potential employees. These are your potential customers. When people are educated, they develop certain spending habits that are compatible with capitalistic growth. So I'm also very surprised why capitalists will be against governments investing in free education. Because you need those people as employees, as your customers, as people you are potentially going to do business with. So for me, there's no case for you could be a good, nice, suit-wearing capitalist investing in education. Those things are compatible. But there's this paranoia around the hatred of what are called free things. Sometimes you invest in free things that can be profitable in the future.
Okay.
One of those things is education.
It's interesting, and for the benefit of our viewers, because whenever you hear this whole issue about government must not be involved, it comes across as it's only in Africa. It's only African governments that have got a penchant for playing in areas where they are not supposed to. But like what Doc here was saying, even there's so many examples of countries that have got free basic education models in their national policy. On that screen there, we have got Finland, where it's actually often cited as the global leader in education. So while education in that country is not necessarily free, rather, university level education and it's actually free for all their citizens. And then Germany as well, the public university level, it's actually free for both domestic and international students. Norway, they've got free higher education for both domestic and international. Sweden as well, Slovenia, Brazil, Argentina. And then when you look at the funding, they are basically, most of those schemes are actually funded by government through taxes and other revenue measures. So it's not an African phenomenon. And in fact, if these big countries whose citizens actually have got capacity to be able to pay for their own education, see value in funding basic education, surely what more for poor African countries who have got a bigger chunk of their population in the school-going age, and they don't have, and the average citizen does not have the capacity to send their kids to school. And so I've spoken about the funding. And also in the African context, I think I come across the the scheme in Ghana for high school, which was launched in 2017, where they have actually made high school free for all high school going kids. And what it has done actually is to increase the enrollment and also reduce gaps, trying to provide equity. Because, being talented and having the capacity to do well, it actually cuts across different income status. So you don't want to disadvantage kids that are coming from poor family by actually insisting that they should pay. So there's a whole range of countries in different parts of the world where education is actually, there's assisted education where government is playing a part. Also, there is private players also doing the same. So we want to hear from our viewers what you think, and as the best model to take, whether government has to be totally out of it, and or maybe there's a role that government has to play. I think another issue that was raised besides education was healthcare, and there was this talk about universal healthcare is not good, and there was reference to the welfare state, the non-state. So basically, if you can't afford it, it's your own issue. At some point, you have to pay. What's your response to that notion as well?
I think it's similar to the problem of education. Any country must make sure that its citizens are healthy. Again, I would argue again that this is also a national security issue. If you were in a conflict and suddenly half your population is sick, you are going to be in trouble. Even during the Roman times, you needed gladiators, Simba, people who are strong. And that means good health. It's maybe nutrition, good healthcare. So the issue of payment, I think it's fair to say if there is a model that allows for those who can afford to pay. In any way, any model of healthcare must involve some form of contribution from individuals. These models, there are a lot of free healthcare models. There's a famous UK one of the National Health Service, the NHS, which I think is a very brilliant model, which is under attack from the Tories and other neoconservative groups. I think a good healthcare model involves the government making sure that everyone is looked after, and those who can pay should be able to pay if there's an argument for that. But I think capitalists have this idea of, it's a free thing, so it's bad and all and all. Would you rather have half of the population that might not afford health care live in debilitating health conditions because they can't survive? I mean, you have to be able to look out for people. And the role of taxation, the state must tax whoever should be taxed and then redistribute that tax revenue. And some of it must go to health, because it's in the state's interest to make sure that the population is healthy. So there can be a balance there. We're not simply saying, and why? I don't see the paranoia around this idea that a welfare state will give people free money to go to school and health. I mean, if you had a company, suddenly you have 10 people who are sick after a few, your 20 employees, and they can't afford. And the problem, the capitalism, that look in America, for example, your health insurance is tied to your job. The day you lose your job, you are doomed. You can't, you don't have health care until Obama came with that Obamacare model. You lose your job, you're in trouble. And I think we don't want those kind of extreme ideas around society. If a society is making money, what's wrong with investing in people's health? You need a good workforce. It's even in the interest of companies. If companies are suddenly finding that most of their potential employees are sick, how is that good for them?
Yes, certainly not good. Yeah.
There are models where even the companies are investing, saying, look, we are building hospitals as a form of acquiring what we call in mining a social license to operate, where, look, every big mining company here has built a hospital. Look at Zimplats in Ngezi. They've invested in local clinics and local hospitals. And it's not It's not a wasteful venture as some of our comrades want to call it. No, it's a strategic venture. One, you gain a social license to operate, meaning communities around you are more friendly.
Okay.
Secondly, it's good for you to just have a healthy community around you for potential, either maybe casual laborers or potential long-term employees. So a healthy society is good for everyone. I don't see why some people would think if the state took some money and put it in free healthcare and free education is a problem. No, it's not.
So what's the best model for that? Is it the state providing some sort of health insurance, or actually running the institutions? Because then the following the counter argument will be like when you look at the Zimbabwean scenario, where government is operating the big health institutions. It's the service levels have actually dropped. If you look at Pari, Mpilo, and etc., and there's been a proliferation of private medical institutions that are coming up. What kind of model works better that should be able to balance the need to provide healthcare for the poor and still be able to do that at the best service level?
Yeah, good question. As I said earlier, our hospitals are a victim of bad governance in those institutions. I mean, bad people running them.
Okay.
Like in Zimbabwe is an extreme example. We will obviously use it as an example because we are Zimbabweans and we are here. What is happening to parastatals can be generalized to our health sector and to our education sector. We've got bad
So
people.
it's not like the models doesn't.
No. The model is good. Remember, every one of us in this room was a beneficiary of our health and education system.
That's
Everyone knows these things were working before. Why are they not working now? There's been a deliberate disinvestment and the appointment of bad people overrunning these institutions. When there's a tender or of any form, it's given to bad people. When the people appointed to run these institutions are corrupt, bad people, some of them must be in prison. They are bad people. Now, you can't just say because institutions are being run by bad people, what should we do? We should remove them. Remove all these bad people because we've got good people. That's why this country has got a lot of other educated. We should attract even some of our healthcare personnel that is now running countries. If you go to the UK, almost the average nurse, social welfare, there is a Zimbabwean. We've got good people there that we should attract, appoint the right people, not based on politics, but based on expertise.
Okay.
We should bring back the right people if we want to go with the model of a state-run health system.
Okay.
And that applies to education as well. We've got a lot of educated Zimbabweans that have lost and they can come back and revive the state education sector. Is there political will for that? I don't know.
Okay.
I think our problem is that we have allowed these institutions to be squandered by unscrupulous bad people, and we can now just blame the model. The model works. It used to work. How was it working? In the first 10 or 15 years of independence, these institutions were working. You would go, everyone who was in a rural area would go to a rural clinic, get all the medical care they needed, and even the schools were doing well. I started speaking English while I was at a little school somewhere in Gokwe. I was learning English in a small remote village. Now, that was the state education system. Why was that bad? It's not bad. It's just that we have allowed these institutions to deteriorate. So we are just saying we must criticize the model. And I'm also not against, if there is a need for a private system, like we already have, we have a lot of, clinic, whatever, private hospitals and surgeries opening at every corner of society. It's a good thing. But that must not happen at the expense of our public health system. That should be supported. These are our people, our entrepreneurs investing in health. But we don't want the country to be overrun by people running social services for profit. I think we should manage that model. And some of them, I think some of these new age clinics are also not being properly supervised. We've seen a lot of some accidents in them because now the people we are running them are not properly qualified. So these models can work side by side, but it is important that we maintain our public health system, and the government must invest in them. But the key issue is for them to function. And I can see the capitalistic critique of this model, because in Zimbabwe, there is a case for them being disbanded. Okay. Because, of course, they are being run by bad people. But are they not revivable? I think we can revive them if we need to. There's just need to be a political will to get rid of all those people, running them down. Every institution that's being run down by a guy we know, which I always think is also treasonous, because we see a lot of people running down important institutions. The referral hospital like Parerenyatwa here being misrun by people who we know they should be removed, and they must be run professionally. So once we do that, if there is a need, already we have, like I said, private players in the sector. They must be encouraged and supported. We're not against that, but it must not be at the expense of our public health system.
So I don't know to what extent the free markets capitalists know that when we are talking of government or state involvement in education and healthcare, we are not talking of the state subsidizing private education. We are not talking of the state subsidizing private healthcare. These are like basic services that are needed by vulnerable members of our society. And you can have a system, like you rightly pointed out, where those who really can't afford must have somewhere where they can run to if they really need the services. And then those ones who need a special type of service and who can pay for it will have to resort to the private offerings that are there. And Zim, there's one statistic that we've been pushing on this show a lot, which is one to do with diaspora remittance. It's actually a direct product of the investment in public education that took place after independence. Obviously, there is a displacement that has taken place for other economic reasons. But the fact that we had an educated citizenry, it made it easier. Usually when people are educated, even in a very difficult situation, they always try to find ways of surviving. I don't know whether it's good or it's bad. I want to just share something with our viewers, which I also found very interesting. So on your screen, there's actually there's a graph and a chart and a lot of stuff. But the critical thing about that, it shows the human capital outcomes by social economic status. What will happen if we just allow the people to fund their public health, their health, and their education? So it's showing that actually the poor are going to get poorer and the rich are going to get richer. And the source of this document is actually the World Bank. And they're saying, for example, on what they call the disaggregated human capital index, productivity as a future worker of a child born today in the richest 20% of households in Zimbabwe is 66, and it's only 47 for a child who is born in the poorest 20%. So already it's affecting the future capacity of the children by the mere fact that one is born in a rich family and the other one is born in a poor family. Then also look at that, the probability of survival to age 5. So children that are born from the richest 20% of households in Zimbabwe, they've got a 95% chance of surviving to age 5. And that number is actually 90% for children from the poorest 20%. And then also the schooling that we are talking about, the expected years of school. You'd find that the richest 20% households in Zimbabwe, when the children start school at age 6, they are likely to complete the 11 years of schooling by the 18th birthday. While, or at least from the poor family, it's around 9 years. So you see, there's disparities, there is actually inequality that you are creating in a society by when you advocating for a situation where government must never be involved. Then the last number that I want to show you, which actually sort of touched me, is the health growth, the not standard rate, because the World Bank also looked at the growth of children from 0 to 5. So standard growth is one area that they looked at. That if the richest family, the children who are not standard, you are looking at 85%. But in fact, it's actually 85% chance. Okay, let me look at it. The percentage of children in the top 20% of households who are not standard is 85%, while it is 68% amongst the poorest families. So even the health status of the children is actually affected. So it's actually very difficult, especially in a poor environment like Zimbabwe, if we decide to say, no, let's unleash market forces. Only those who can pay should be able to access healthcare and also education. Not only are you affecting the adults who are there, you are also actually perpetuating the inequality in society, where the rich will continue to acquire education. They'll be they'll have good health, but the poor, even their kids and children's children, also be affected. So that's I don't think that's the kind of society that even a capitalist would want, because, like I've rightly said, these people are that's where the capitalists draw his labor from, his customers from, and also your neighbors. It's maybe you might need to just comment in terms of what is the impact of having those wide disparities between the poor and the rich, and how favorable is that scenario to the capitalist?
No. It's a problematic, because I think having a healthy, educated society is good for everyone. It's good for everyone in the sense that, from a political point of view, it's subsidial for anyone in power to allow health and bad education to deteriorate to those levels. It's not a vote winning if you're a politician. To allow a large number of people not to gain health. Have you noticed the number of health institutions and schools that gets opened towards an election? What that means is that it is important for politicians to be seen to be investing in social services. It is a good political gesture to be seen to be opening a school, to be seen to be opening a clinic in a remote area where people don't have access to this infrastructure. So that's a political point of view. But for an economic point of view, it's always good to have healthy people. It's good for everyone. It's good for everyone to have healthy, educated people. In fact, when the human capital development is critical for economic growth, a sign of a developing country, if we wanted to achieve what is being called Vision 2030 under the National Development Strategy, is to just make sure that we have developed our human capital to a process where, if we are an upper middle income country, we are also, that cannot be achieved when people are not in good health, when people are not educated, because we need to harness those skills, right? And when we harness those skills, it's good for everyone. Who funds them? If the state, what is the problem if the state intervened in that area? There's no problem, because when a state is educating people, it's setting the best for a good capitalist economy, because those are the very skills that are needed for industrial development. So I'm very surprised. That's why I spoke of schizophrenia, because the same capitalists who started whinging, you know what, I'm setting my company, but I can't get the right kind of skills. But you are against these skills being developed. You see? And it's expensive to hire people from faraway places. You've got to pay for the relocation costs and all those things. What if your labor, that's why some companies even move to where the labor is.
Okay.
You see? So isn't it beautiful that tomorrow you set up an entity and then suddenly you've got over 200 nice CVs? Because you've got these people around you who can do what you want them to do. Something that has been mastered in China. You know, they can manufacture anything there because they have the capacity, they have developed the human capital, which Africa has failed to do. So it's a prerequisite. In Africa, I think health and education should be universal to everyone because we haven't developed enough. You see, the places where we should talk about this whole people must pay for themselves are like in England and other developed countries. Not a struggling continent like ours. We still need to subsidize these people so we've got the critical skills around us. We can't industrialize when we don't have these kind of skills. It's also expensive to hire people from somewhere else. So if we develop these skills locally, we are able to harness the skills and, you know, it's a good investment.
And it's interesting. So even those Western countries that have highlighted, Doc, they actually have some version of universal healthcare programs are going on. So on you'd find, you had already mentioned the UK, also Canada, Australia, Sweden, France and Germany have got some form of universal healthcare program. Obviously, that encompasses both the involvement of the state, but also the private sector. So again, just like we have seen with education, it's actually very, in fact, most countries, even the developed ones, are still funding to a certain extent the basic education and also basic healthcare. And in the African continent, I found something very interesting that's happening in Kenya. Rather, it's actually in Rwanda, where they launched what they call the community-based health insurance in around 2000. And the funding mechanism is actually a combination of government subsidies, individual companies, donors coming in, and other developmental partners. And the emphasis is actually on preventive care. So they don't want to wait until there is a crisis for them to start providing healthcare. And so you find there's a lot of vaccinations that are taking place, educational program, just to try to make sure that the people's health needs are actually covered. And there's also strategic investment in health infrastructure that's taking place, and just to make sure that there's health equity and inclusivity. And it's actually one of the programs that even the World Bank is highlighted as a typical success of a state-funded healthcare program. So we are seeing that in the Western world, there is that involvement, but also here in Africa, where the need is actually much more. We are seeing some countries that are also doing that. Maybe the last point that we just want to discuss is the whole issue of subsidies, but now not around social needs, but more business, entrepreneurial ventures. So maybe the much talked about in the Zim context is on farming and mining. Or what's your view when it comes to state subsidizing farming activities, and also the role that they play in the mining? You've been speaking about mining a lot. I'm sure you say a bit of that.
Yeah, I mean, just following on from our issue of health, which we've dwelled on quite for a long time, we do things in a certain way in the African context because sometimes, even going back to the health issue, it's Ubuntu, our philosophy of just making sure that people are looked after. It's our philosophical concept that you can't be sitting there while your neighbor is dying there, even if they didn't have, you go to subsidize them, run with them to the hospital.
Okay.
But you can't say, look, maybe because when I do that, it's a social welfare and I'm a capitalist. Come on. You'll be accused of witchcraft if you did that. You allowed your neighbor to die. But anyhow, maybe the subsidies in, you say the subsidies in agriculture. I would argue that as someone who has spent so many years studying agricultural systems, I think all agriculture across the world is subsidized. You can't have an agricultural sector that's not subsidized. It's impossible. Again, it goes back to the national security issue. The country must just make sure that it's got enough food for its people. This is why you go as far as America, the most capitalistic, one of the most capitalistic intensive, they are subsidizing. When you receive food aid from America, written from the American people, you think it's free food. No, it's not free food. It's subsidized by the American government.
Okay.
It's the American government buying food from its farmers and sending it to Africa. There's no farmer in America who is happy to send your kids food while you're in Goko or some village somewhere. Why?
Oh, we get the same that maybe
They're not
just donating it.
No, it's part of American foreign policy to make sure they are seen to be. You know what? They buy food from their farmers.
So in a way, they're actually sustaining the operations of their farmers.
Of course.
And they're finding a way
Yeah.
to get that product to.
Of course.
Okay.
They're just simply buying the food to sustain the agriculture. Okay. There's the infamous common agricultural policy in Europe, where most of the farmers, I worked at a farm, my good example is that my first time in the UK in 2000, I worked at a farm at Riverford Farm, an organic farm. Okay. You know, this farmer was showing me around where he was getting money for leaving some of his land fallow. And that man was coming from the EU Common Agricultural Policy. He was leaving something called the wildlife corridors, so that birds and other animals can sort of, you just paid to leave your land fallow. And we visited a farm where these farmers are unprofitable, but the government subsidizes them to grow food because they are unprofitable. Because the government will be saying, look, it is better to keep our farmers in business because it is dangerous as a foreign policy to rely on food imports. Okay. Basic example, Russia-Ukraine war. Imagine if Russia was 90% reliant on Ukraine grain, what would happen since they're at war?
Yeah, there would be.
We are already suffering the problems of food self-sufficiency in Africa because of the Russia-Ukraine war. A reason why we should, in fact, put more money in our own agriculture. Again, when we use this model based on Zimbabwe, the whole emerging question will be corruption. I know that will come out, but corruption, it is something that happens where there are people and it can be managed. We have an entire anti-corruption commission, which ironically is housed where the American embassy is. But anyhow, that's a discussion for another day. But I think I've seen quite a lot of cars over there, and I'm thinking we should just deal with these corrupt people. Look, a lot of the money that is put on these subsidies is diverted by some people. We know of politicians who were caught diverting fertilizers and all. But we've seen also that where fertilizers and other inputs that are subsidized by the government are utilized, our people become productive. There's no problem. There is no, we know that once you subsidize people and there's no corruption, people become productive. Because one of the fundamental challenges facing our farmers is the problem of not having the means of production. They can't have fertilizers, they can't afford them, they can't have inputs. When one of the so-called green revolution that happened in the aftermath of our independence in 1980, the huge grain supplies, it was because of government subsidies. And there was less corruption. You see, this country has become progressively corrupt.
Okay.
You see, our first 10 years of independence, people were still afraid. Our politicians were good people, they were not corrupt. Right now, quite a lot of people are corrupt. So when you come up with a program like the farm mechanization program, you see a lot of these malcontents diverting these things for themselves and so forth, and undermining what is a noble initiative by the government to mechanize our operations. So there is a good critique there for corruption, but it does not mean the model of subsidy doesn't work. In America, it's working. In other countries, it's working. So I would argue that in any country, agriculture should be, and has always been subsidized for food security reasons and for national security reasons. And some countries are even using agriculture as a foreign policy tool. The Americans, of course, they are doing that. They are using that by subsidizing their farmers. So what a brilliant initiative. So why should we not subsidize our own farmers? We should, But we should just make sure that these people, the Kotko groups, people diverting things, I mean, we know the people. So why should we not just criticize the model? We need to cage these people so that we set an example that if the government is taking initiatives, cage the people. Don't just create a commission that's not caging people. Make sure we've got successful, investigations, and these people go through criminal charges, evidence is used. And then our models are not unfairly criticized. I feel like we are leaving ourselves vulnerable to unfair criticism because we are allowing people to undermine government initiatives that should be running well, but because we have allowed bad people to run them, people start saying, look, we are wasting our money. I saw that guy driving a Ferrari because he stole money from Kotko. You see the problem? I saw that guy, that guy drinking that expensive whiskey there. That's the guy responsible for the this farm mechanization program. I saw the guy who is supposed to do one, he's packed 15 combine harvesters at his farm. I mean, why should you allow people to do that? You are unfairly allowing people to criticize a noble government initiative. And we know those things. We need to mechanize our farmers. We need to subsidize them. And after the land reform, some of us who have supported the land reform is that our people are poorly mechanized. Our people are poorly capacitated. We should be able, you can't just give people land and expect miracles so they can just grow crops like that. They need to be supported.
At this note, Doc, thank you so much. Well articulated. And to our viewers, what's coming out from this discussion is we are in support of the market economy, individual liberty, but also in support of social welfare policies, because even the capitalists still look up to the people in the community as for labor and also for the customer. And if it's difficult for the capitalist to actually flourish in an environment where everyone around him is poor, and you create a situation where there will be a lot of social unrest, who is better placed to provide these social services? Certainly the capitalist doesn't seem interested, but the government has got a responsibility. That's why they collect taxes so that they can cover some of these needs. Is that supposed to be forever? Personally, I don't think so. But when an economy or when a society is actually poor, the way we are, and you have got a bigger young population, you need to make sure that they are well educated, they have the skills, so that in future they'll be able to be to contribute meaningfully to the development of their country, and even to create businesses. And also they need to be of good health for them to be able to do that. We are criticizing the model probably from the Zim side, but it's actually not because the model itself is bad. It's because, like what Dr. Mkodzon here said, is because of the corruption history that we've had, where certain of our public institutions have not been able to actually contribute meaningfully and create value and be able to discharge the objectives of their creation. So instead of actually attacking the model, we need to actually go to the root, which is deal with the corruption, deal with the bad actors, and still be able to provide social nets, so that in future you're creating a base, the client for the capitalist and also the labor for the capitalist. So if this makes us communist, then we are happy to wear the badge. Otherwise, it was a good show, and bye-bye. See you next week.